In 2020, when COVID-19 disrupted global supply chains, over 60 low-income countries antibiotic shortages within this. This is the sovereignty gap. I'm Dr. Anthony Iyure Anaweokhai. On this channel, we decode global health through evidence-based analysis, one crisis, one solution at a time. This content is educational, based on the World Health Organization 2024 to 2025 data and CDC reports. It's not medical advice. For antimicrobial prescribing or stewardship implementation, please consult qualified healthcare professionals and infectious disease specialists. Now, the sovereignty gap. Global health sovereignty refers to a nation's capacity to protect its population's health through domestic resources, manufacturing capabilities, and policy autonomy. Three things: domestic resources, manufacturing capabilities, policy autonomy. Now, in antimicrobial access, this sovereignty remains severely compromised for most low and middle income countries. Over 60 countries faced antibiotic shortages in 2020. The COVID-19 pandemic exposed this vulnerability with devastating clarity. When international supply chains fractured in early 2020, over 60 low income countries experienced critical antibiotic shortages within weeks. India, the world's largest generic drug manufacturer, implemented export restrictions to ensure domestic supply. Countries dependent on imports confronted empty pharmacy shelves. Patients die from treatable infections, not because of antimicrobial resistance, but because of antimicrobial absence. This vulnerability extends beyond pandemic disruptions. The pharmaceutical supply chain for essential medicines concentrates in remarkably few locations. Approximately 80% of active pharmaceutical ingredients for antibiotics originate in just two countries: China, India. Final formulation occurs in a handful of facilities globally. Quality assurance, packaging, distribution, these creates additional choke points. Any disruption, be it geopolitical tension, natural disasters, trade disputes, manufacturing failures, can cascade into global shortages. The World Health Organization's 2024 essential medicines list includes antibiotics that periodically experience global stockouts. Things like Byzantine penicillin G, which is essential for preventing rheumatic heart disease, faces recurring shortages. Piperacillin tazobactam is a critical hospital antibiotic and experiences intermittent unavailability. These shortages stem not from insufficient manufacturing capacity, but from market concentration and supply chain fragility. Now, the implications for antimicrobial resistance prove profound. When first line antibiotics become unavailable, clinicians prescribe whatever remains accessible. Now, often, these are broader spectrum agents than are medically indicated. This inappropriate use accelerates resistance development. Supply chain failures thus contribute directly to the resistance crisis. We begin with a quote. The political philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau argued, true freedom requires self-sufficiency. In global health, sovereignty over essential medicines represents not just merely economic policy, but fundamental public health security. Now, local manufacturing is a strategic imperative. Local pharmaceutical manufacturing capacity represents the cornerstone of health sovereignty. Countries producing essential medicines domestically insulate themselves from supply chain disruptions. They reduce import costs, they create employment, and build technological capabilities. Local manufacturing, in a nutshell, is equal to health security. The economic case strengthens beyond security considerations. African nations collectively spend approximately $14 billion annually importing pharmaceuticals. This expenditure drains foreign exchange reserves while generating zero local employment or technology transfer. Establishing regional manufacturing hubs could redirect substantial portions of this spending towards domestic economic development. Several initiatives demonstrate feasibility. In 2021, the African Union launched the African Medicines Agency. The aim was to harmonize regulatory standards and facilitate regional manufacturing. The African Vaccine Manufacturing Initiative supports establishment of biologics production facilities. These frameworks apply equally to antibiotics and other essential medicines. India's generic pharmaceutical industry offers instructive precedents. Following patent law modifications in the 1970s, India developed robust domestic manufacturing capacity. Today, Indian companies supply approximately 20% of global generic drug volume. This capacity enabled India to provide affordable antiretrovirals during the HIV/AIDS crisis, fundamentally transforming treatment access in resource-limited settings. However, replicating India's success requires overcoming substantial barriers. Manufacturing antibiotics demand technical expertise, demand quality assurance systems, demand regulatory infrastructure, and demand significant capital investment. Small markets in individual low-income countries may not justify these investments. Regional approaches, pooling demand across multiple countries, prove more viable. Technology transfer mechanisms, however, faces challenges. Pharmaceutical companies protecting intellectual property resist sharing manufacturing know-how. The World Health Organization's COVID-19 technology access pool attempted to facilitate voluntary licensing and technology sharing with limited success. Compulsory licensing provisions under the Agreement on Trade-Related Aspects of Intellectual Property Rights provide legal mechanisms but face political and diplomatic pressures. The Medicines Patent Pool was established in 2010. It demonstrates successful models. This organization negotiates voluntary licenses with patent holders, enabling generic manufacturers in low and middle income countries to produce medications for local markets. Expanding this model to include antibiotics, particularly newer agents, could enhance access while preserving innovation incentives. Building manufacturing capacity requires sustained investment, requires technical assistance, and requires political commitment. However, the COVID-19 experience demonstrates that dependency carries unacceptable risk. So we come to regional cooperation and pooled procurement. No single low-income country possesses sufficient market size to support comprehensive pharmaceutical manufacturing independently. Regional cooperation mechanisms aggregate demand, enabling economically viable production sales and negotiating power with suppliers. In a nutshell, regional cooperation creates economies of scale. The Pan-African Health Organization Strategic Fund exemplifies effective pool procurement. It was established in 2000. This mechanism consolidates purchasing across Latin American and Caribbean countries. Pool demand enables bulk purchasing at reduced prices while ensuring quality standards through centralized procurement protocols. Member countries access essential medicines at costs that are 40 to 50% below individual procurement prices. The Global Fund to fight AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria employs similar approaches. Pooled procurement mechanisms leverage collective purchasing power to negotiate favorable prices for antiretrovirals, antimalarials, and tuberculosis medications. Quality assurance through the World Health Organization pre-qualification ensures production standards. These models apply directly to antibiotic procurement. The African Union has its African Medical Supplies Platform. It was launched during COVID-19. It facilitated coordinated procurement of medical supplies, including antibiotics. Although initially focused on pandemic response, the platform demonstrates the feasibility of sustained regional cooperation. Now, expanding its mandate to include routine essential medicines procurement would enhance access while building towards local manufacturing. Challenges persist. Coordinating across multiple countries with varying regulatory systems, varying procurement processes, and varying political priorities proves complex. Harmonizing quality standards, managing logistics across diverse geographies, and ensuring equitable distribution requires robust institutional frameworks. Sovereignty concerns also arise when countries cede procurement authority to regional bodies. However, the benefits justify these complexities. Pooled procurement reduces costs. Pooled procurement improves supply reliability. Pooled procurement enables quality assurance, and pooled procurement creates negotiating leverage. For antibiotics specifically, coordinated regional approaches can ensure access to both established and newer agents while managing stewardship to slow resistance development. The EU's joint procurement agreement for vaccines during COVID-19 demonstrates that even high-income countries benefit from cooperation. For resource-limited settings, regional collaboration proves essential. And this brings us to quality assurance and counterfeit medicines. Pharmaceutical sovereignty requires not merely access to medicines, but access to quality assured medicines. Substandard and falsified medical products pose dual threats. One, there's direct harm to patients, and two, there's contribution to antimicrobial resistance through inadequate drug concentrations. Substandard antibiotics drive resistance. The World Health Organization estimates that 10% of medical products in low and middle income countries are substandard or falsified. For antibiotics, this percentage even exceeds 15% in some regions. These products may contain incorrect active ingredients, may contain insufficient doses, may contain contamination, or may contain no active ingredient whatsoever. Patients receiving such products face treatment failures, face adverse events, and face economic losses from purchasing ineffective medications. The resistance implications prove particularly concerning. Subtherapeutic antibiotic concentrations create ideal conditions for resistance development. Sufficient drug exposure to exert selective pressure without achieving bacterial eradication. Now, studies that were done in Southeast Asia demonstrate associations between counterfeit antibiotic prevalence and resistance rates in local bacterial populations. Addressing this challenge requires strengthening regulatory capacity. Many low-income countries lack resources for comprehensive pharmaceutical regulation. You need things like manufacturing facility inspections, you need import controls, you need market surveillance, and you need enforcement against violators. Building this capacity demands technical assistance and sustained funding. The World Health Organization's global surveillance and monitoring system for substandard and falsified medical products collects data on incidents globally. However, reporting remains incomplete. Many countries lack detection capabilities or face disincentives to publicly acknowledge problems that might damage pharmaceutical industry reputation. Their regional regulatory harmonization through mechanisms like the African Medicine Agency can pool expertise and resources. Collaborative approaches to inspection, collaborative approaches to approval, collaborative approaches to surveillance prove more efficient than individual national efforts. As the saying goes, the chain is only as strong as its weakest link. In pharmaceutical supply chains, quality assurance at every point proves essential. All this cannot be done without money. So we need to talk about financing mechanisms and sustainability. Establishing and sustaining local pharmaceutical manufacturing requires substantial capital investment, substantial production facilities, quality assurance systems, skilled workforce development, ongoing operations. All these demand financing mechanisms that adapted to low resource settings. Hear this. Manufacturing requires 50 to $100 million initial investment. Initial investment. Initial facility construction and equipment procurement for antibiotic manufacturing requires 50 to $100 million, depending on production scale and complexity of the product. Ongoing productions need working capital, need raw material procurement, need quality control, and need regulatory compliance. Very few low-income countries can allocate such resources from domestic budget alone. Therefore, development finance institutions play critical roles. The World Bank, African Development Bank, and the other regional development banks provide concessional loans and technical assistance for pharmaceutical manufacturing projects. The International Finance Corporation, in particular, offers private sector financing with risk-sharing mechanisms. These institutions must prioritize essential medicines manufacturing as strategic development investments. Blended finance mechanisms combine public and private capital, can share risk while attracting commercial investments. Advanced market commitments, we're talking things like guaranteed purchases at predetermined prices, provide revenue certainty that reduces investment risk. I'll give an example. The pneumococcal advanced market commitment successfully stimulated vaccine manufacturing in emerging markets using this approach. However, sustainability requires viable business models beyond donor funding. Facilities must achieve cost competitiveness with imports while maintaining quality standards. This demands economies of scale, it demands operational efficiency, and it demands market access. Protected domestic markets may be necessary initially, but risk inefficiency without competitive pressures. The path forward requires coordinated action in terms of development financing, in terms of technical assistance, in terms of regulatory harmonization, and in terms of political commitment. The COVID-19 experience demonstrates that pharmaceutical dependency carries unacceptable costs. Health sovereignty demands investment today to ensure security tomorrow. Policymakers and public health professionals, how can your country strengthen pharmaceutical? Share your thoughts. In conclusion, we'll just say 60 countries faced antibiotic shortages when supply chains fractured. The sovereignty gap threatens health security and exacerbates antimicrobial resistance. Local manufacturing capacity, regional cooperation, quality assurance, and sustainable financing, however, create pathways to pharmaceutical independence. Health sovereignty is not protectionism, it is pragmatic security. The evidence from COVID-19 demands action. Dependency is not destiny. Countries can build capacity with political will and international support. On the next episode, we'll look beyond antibiotics. We're talking bacteriophages, artificial intelligence, immunotherapies. Now, this represents the frontier of antimicrobial resistance. Subscribe to Global Health Decoded at Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, LinkedIn, Global Health Decoded. Next, we'll look at beyond antibiotics. Did we nail this? Maybe, maybe not. Always fact checked, always peer reviewed. Dr. Anthony Ray and Anaweokhai. See you